Today's story is a perfect example of why, when you get that sinking feeling in your gut, like something's just not right, that you should really just listen to your gut feelings. But before we get into today's story, if you've had an encounter or an experience with anything that you'd like to have shared on the show, please email me at the link below. And if you like today's story, please gently slap that like button. And the next time you're going off hunting and your local regulations do not permit you to carry a firearm, grab that subscribe button, stick it in your thigh holster so you don't miss out on any future content. Now, let's get into today's encounter. Today's encounter comes from Richard, and it happened in 2017 up in northeastern New York State. Richard was 57 years old at the time. He had grown up in Rochester, and 2 years before he had retired, and him and his wife bought their retirement property out by Dannemora. Richard was a very avid outdoorsman. He grew up whitetail hunting. He grew up fishing with his father and his two brothers. And his number one passion in the fall was hunting whitetail deer with his daughter. Now, because Richard was retired, he had a lot of time to spend outdoors, but very seldomly would he actually venture off on his own without his daughter, except for at the very beginning of season when he would be doing a lot of scouting, trying to pattern the deer that him and his daughter would be going after. See, Richard did not really like to spend too much time in the woods by himself because about 5 years prior, he was out doing an archery hunt and he had a really close call with a bear. He actually had a sow black bear charge him and come within about 10 feet of him. So he was very on edge to go out by himself just because of that, because New York state laws would not permit him to carry a sidearm during the archery or muzzleloading seasons. However, come 2017, he was really starting to reopen up to the idea of going off on solo hunts again. So one Wednesday in early October, right during the archery season for whitetail, he told his wife that he was going to be going out to the hunting property to do a scouting hunt for the upcoming weekend when he would be going with his daughter. His wife asked if he would be taking his sidearm with him, and Richard said that he would not be. He said it was just not worth the hassle if he got stopped because of the environmental conservation law in New York. So he just said he was going to be bringing just his bow, he would bring bear spray, and that he would be back shortly after dark. So he grabbed all of his gear, went out to his truck, and then he made the 15-minute drive all the way out to where his buddy lived just north of Sirach. His buddy's property was a property that him and his daughter would always hunt. So when he got there, he pulled his truck over by a little bit of a cattle corral. Then he grabbed all his gear and he started making his way across his buddy's bean field. His buddy's bean field is about 300 yards long by about 150 yards wide. And right up on the northeast corner, about 20 yards into the trees, is where his tree stand was that him and his daughter would always hunt. So he was making his way across a bean field, kind of scanning, keeping his eye open for any sign of deer. When he got to where he would have to turn to go into where the tree stand was, he made a right turn, started heading into the trees about 20 yards, climbed up into his stand, and he settled in for the evening's hunt. He sat there for a couple of hours, and while he was sitting there, he did notice that the area seemed very quiet. It was a lot more quiet than normal, and he was not seeing any deer at all. Normally, when he would be sitting up in this stand, he would see quite a few deer grazing out on the bean field, coming along the heavy travel corridor right at the base of the stand. But this evening, he was not seeing anything. Right at the end of legal light, which is a half an hour after sundown, he was getting ready to climb down out of the stand when he looked across the bean field to the far side, which is about 170 yards away from where his tree stand is, and he sees this large dark figure about 4 feet off the ground kind of moving right along the side of the bush line on the edge of the beans. He stopped for a second looking towards this dark figure, and instantly he thought that this was a bear. And right away, that experience of when he got charged by the sow, everything just kind of came rushing back at him, and he was feeling incredibly uneasy at this point. So at this point, he was feeling incredibly on edge, and he was really wishing that he would have just said to hell with the regulations and just would have brought his pistol. But because he didn't have it, what he decided he was going to do was he was just going to hang out in the tree stand for a little bit, watching this bear to see what it would do. He wanted to see if it was going to move closer to him or if it was going to wander away or just stay put. So after about 5 minutes of watching this bear, It slowly turned and made its way back into the trees. Richard took this as his opportunity to get back to his truck, so he quickly climbed down out of the stand and, at a very brisk walk, made his way back along those beams to his truck. When he got home that night, he told his wife about the bear and that he was going to be going out again the next evening. And again, his wife said, "Well, are you going to bring your sidearm with you?" And Richard really had to think about it for a few minutes if he really wanted to risk running into a bear without having a sidearm, or if he really wanted to get stopped by a warden and be caught with a sidearm when he's not supposed to have one. Ultimately, the next day on Thursday, when he was setting out to go back out to the property in the afternoon, he decided that he had his bear spray, he had a bear banger, he had his bow, and that he really wasn't too far away from his truck, and that he just did not want to risk being stopped with his pistol. So he just left it at home, grabbed all the same stuff as the night before, and made the drive all the way back out to the property. That evening, while he was sitting in his tree stand, it was very much the same as the day before. It was incredibly quiet, almost like an eerie, calm quiet. He didn't see any deer whatsoever. However, that night, when it was the end of legal light, he had not seen any sign of that bear. Even though the entire time up in the stand, his mind was just focused on that bear that he had seen the night before. So when it came time to get down out of the stand and make his way back to the truck, again, he climbed down out of the stand. He kept his eyes peeled, his head on a swivel, looking around for any sign of that bear. He quickly made his way back to the truck, and this time, instead of going all the way home first, he stopped in at his buddy's house. When he stopped in to see his buddy, he told his buddy about this giant bear that he had seen the night before, and asked his buddy if he had seen a big bear like that on the property himself. His buddy told him that he had not seen a large bear on the property, but did tell him that about a month before he did find the remains of a smaller bear that had been partially consumed by some form of predator or some type of scavenger. Richard found that pretty interesting, but he also knew that it was really just part of nature and it's not really an uncommon occurrence at all. So after a short visit with his buddy, he went home and he started having a talk with his wife. His wife asked him if there was anything weird that happened that night, if he had seen that bear again or not. He told her that he did not see the bear, but that all evening while he was up in his tree stand, he had kind of a weird feeling like he was being watched, and he just kind of had a gut feeling like he shouldn't have been there. He told her about that eerie, calm, quiet silence, and he told her that he was not sure if he was going to go the next day or not. He said he just had this feeling like he should just not be going out there by himself anymore. However, Friday morning he woke up, he had a doctor's appointment in Plattsburgh, so he went to his appointment, and on his way home he just happened to turn around and he caught a glimpse of his bow sitting on the back seat. At this point, he started to wonder if he should just brush all this off, go out for a hunt, and just move past seeing that bear. He thought that all these feelings he was having were because of that bear and because of what had happened to him 5 years before. So at this point, he decided, you know what? I'm just going to suck it up. I'm going to head out to the hunting property and everything will be fine. So instead of heading home, he ended up making a turn, headed up to Sirac, got to his buddy's property, and just like the last 2 nights, he made that walk across a bean field and he sat in his stand ready for the evening hunt. That evening, again, while he was sitting in the stand, everything was completely silent and he was starting to get a real heavy gut feeling like he should just get out of there. However, he tried to force his way through it, again, thinking it was just because of the bear he saw the first night, and he just needed to get past that. That entire night, while he was in his stand, it was much the same as the previous 2 nights. Everything was absolutely silent. He saw no deer whatsoever, and about 15 minutes before the end of legal light, when he was looking at this thing through his binoculars, he started to piece together that just the size and the shape of this thing did not match any bear he had ever seen before. It was about 4 feet off the ground, but just the body shape of this thing just made absolutely no sense to him. So he sat there looking in that direction, trying to figure out what he was looking at, when all of a sudden this thing stood up. It stood up on 2 legs. It was about 7 feet tall, completely covered in dark brownish black hair, and it was facing away from him, looking into the trees. Even at that distance, he could tell that this thing was just absolutely muscular and it had massively broad shoulders. Kind of startled, he dropped his binoculars to his chest and he was like, holy crap. And it was like this thing heard him even though it was about 170 yards away, because all of a sudden he saw it turn, and even without his binoculars, he could tell that it was looking directly at him. Richard at this point knew what he was looking at. He had grown up hearing stories about Sasquatch, about Bigfoot, but he had never dreamed that he would ever have a sighting or an encounter with one in person. And at this point, he had no idea what to do at all. He was just kind of in full-on panic mode up in the tree. He just stared towards this Sasquatch, and it started making its way along the edge of the bean field, kind of in his direction. At this point, he didn't know if he should just climb out of the stand and book it for the truck, or if he should just stay completely still and hope that this thing would not come any closer to him. He chose to stay as still as possible, hoping that it would just wander off into the trees. But he sat there watching this Sasquatch make its way just along the edge of the bush line, coming closer and closer to him. When it was about 85-90 yards away, it turned and it started heading into the bush almost directly in front of him. At this point, Richard can no longer see the Sasquatch at all, but he could hear it moving through the trees. He could hear the sticks cracking, he could hear trees breaking, and he could even see the tops of some of the trees kind of swaying as this thing made its way through the bush towards him. Richard could hear it getting closer and closer, and the entire time his heart just started racing faster and faster. He thought about grabbing his bow, but he did not think that his bow would really be much use in self-defense against this thing just because of the sheer size of it. He sat there in his stand listening to this thing move closer, and he looked down at one point, and about 20 yards from the base of his tree, this Sasquatch was standing there just looking up directly at him. Richard at this point just completely froze. He did not want to make eye contact with it, but he did not want to take his eyes off this thing at all. So for about 20 seconds, him and the Sasquatch were just staring directly at each other. At this point, all of a sudden off to the north, Richard heard what sounded like a whoop, and as soon as he heard that, this Sasquatch that was staring up at him let out like a huff, almost like a like, I know you're there type of thing. And then it turned and it made its way to the north through the bush. Once he could no longer hear it moving through the trees, he quickly climbed down out of the stand, and he just had a full-on run, ran right back to his truck. The whole time as he ran back to his truck, the face of that Sasquatch just kept replaying in his mind. He just kept picturing its partially hair-covered face with its dark skin and its large flat teeth, and he just kept thinking that at any time this thing was just going to come barreling out of the bush and grab him. When he got to his truck, he started it up and he hightailed it all the way home. When he got home, he told his wife exactly what had happened, and his wife did believe him just because she could see how shaken up he was, and she knew that he would just not make something up like this. After talking with his wife, he decided he had to call his friend. He had to give his buddy a heads up that this thing was on his property. So he called his buddy up, and his buddy did not believe him. His buddy said, "Richard, I think you just need to relax. I know you saw a large bear on the property. I know how you feel about bears. I think you saw another bear and you're just overreacting." Richard at this point was a little bit hurt and a little bit taken back that his buddy did not believe him. He had grown up with this guy. They were best friends. And he was just shocked that he just would not believe him about this. And it kind of started a little bit of a fight between the two. Then after this, he decided he had to call his daughter and tell his daughter that they would not be going out the next day. So he called his daughter, and his daughter was kind of on the fence. She sort of believed him, but she was kind of had the same mentality as his buddy, where she just thought that, maybe my dad saw a bear. I know how he is with bears, and he's just overreacting. However, Richard made her promise that she would not go out there without him. And she told him, okay, Dad, I won't go out tomorrow. Everything will be fine. Don't worry about it. Saturday morning came. Richard woke up. He was having coffee with his wife when all of a sudden he heard his cell phone vibrating on the table. So he grabbed his cell phone, picked it up, and it was a message from his daughter. So he logged onto his phone, and it turned out that she had just sent him a selfie. She had sent him a selfie from up in the same tree stand that he had been those last 3 nights, with a text message saying, "See, Dad, I told you there was nothing to be afraid of." At this point, Richard was absolutely furious, but he was also absolutely terrified for his daughter. So he quickly ran, grabbed one of his rifles, ran out to the truck, and he hightailed it out to the property. When he got there, he did not park his truck up by that corral. He jumped out, he opened a gate, jumped back in the truck, and then he just floored it right across that bean field. He got to the corner where that tree stand was, and he just started wailing on the horn. He could see his daughter up in the tree, and he was just wailing on the horn to try to keep anything in the area away from them and to kind of signal his daughter that she needed to get out of there and get to the truck right now. His daughter kind of caught the drift. She came down out of the stand, came up to the truck. Richard yelled at her to get in, so she climbed into the passenger seat, and then he floored it out of the bean field. However, as he was going back along the bean field, his buddy actually happened to pull up and saw Richard's truck just bombing across the field. Now, his buddy and Richard, they both had kind of an understanding and an agreement that Richard could hunt whenever he wanted. He could take a quad out, he could take a quad along the tree line, but under no circumstance was he ever to drive his truck across that field, just because his buddy did not want any of his crops being damaged at all. So when his buddy saw Richard's truck bombing across the field, he got pretty ticked off with Richard. So when Richard and his daughter pulled up, his buddy rolled his window down and started yelling at him right away. Richard at this point told his buddy the only reason he did that was to get his daughter, and it was because of what had happened the night before. His buddy at this point said, "You know what, Richard, I think you're losing it. You know what, you're not allowed to hunt on my property anymore. You need to calm down. Maybe someday in the future you could come back, but until you collect yourself, you're just not welcome here." Richard at this point had a few choice words for his friends, and then he drove off and headed home. He didn't talk to his buddy for about 5 days, and all of a sudden his phone went off. He looked at his phone, and it was his buddy calling him. So he answered the phone, and the first thing his buddy said to him when he answered the phone was, "Richard, I'm sorry, I owe you an apology." Richard at this point said, "Why? What happened? What's up?" And his buddy said, I just saw it too. And it turned out that his buddy was out on one of his tractors about 20 minutes before that phone call. He was harvesting those beans when he looked over to the right, and he saw what matched the exact description that Richard gave him of this creature, this Sasquatch, moving along the tree line, paralleling him while he was in his tractor. So Richard and his buddy, they came up with a plan that, you know what, from now on, any work that goes on the property, there has to be both of them present for, and that they would always have to be armed. Now, in the 6 years since, they have not had any more sightings of the Sasquatch. They have not heard any of those whoops. They have not smelled any weird smells. And just this past fall, they've started to re-hunt that property again. However, they have made a deal that nobody is allowed to go hunting on the property alone. They always have to be together. Even if 2 people go out, they have to sit in the same tree stand. And to this day, even though he's not supposed to, Richard does carry a sidearm with him whenever he goes to that property. Well, that's it for today's encounter. My question for you guys is, what would you have done in Richard's position that first night, that second night, or after that encounter? Please tell me what you would have done down in the comments. Now, because there's been a lot of comments about my Canadian accent, because yes, I am from Canada, I'm just going to say thanks for joining us there, bud, and I'll see you next time, eh?